Today's session, how to kickstart your data privacy program, is not only for those who doesn't have or just starting a new data privacy program, but it is also for those who has a data privacy program in place, as the session overall will be a refresher and will focus in its last part on maintaining your existing program alive. My name is Walid Mahmoud. I'm currently the head of information security and risk management in Mantrack Group. Group is a Caterpillar dealer in 13 countries. I have in total 21 years of experience, mainly in IT service management and IT security, focusing in the last 5 years of my career on cybersecurity. I have a master's degree in management of technology, and I have a certified organization manager certificate from Florida State University. I also have several professional security certificates from EC Council, the Certified Chief Information Security Officer, CISSP, ITIL Certified Master 27001, Lead Implementer Practitioner, and the Microsoft Most Valuable Professional. Key takeaways for today are how data privacy differs from data security. Then I will walk you through a step-by-step guide to create a data privacy program. And lastly, we will be looking into how you can assure continuity of your existing data privacy program. First things first, as many still think of security and privacy as being the same thing, while they are not, I'd like to make sure we understand the difference between data privacy and data security. Data privacy is all about protecting personal data. Data privacy covers the full life cycle from collection of personal data to disposal. For example, if you collect personal data without a consent, whether you will secure it or not, you are in a non-compliance situation with most of the privilege, with the privacy regulation, with most of the privacy regulations. If you are retaining personal data more than needed, you are in non-compliance situation as well. Let me give a clear example to differentiate between data privacy breach and data security one. When you give your personal data to a bank and it shares it with a third party without notifying you, this is then a breach of data privacy. While if you give your personal data to a bank and a hacker managed to penetrate the bank system due to lack of security controls, this is then a breach of data security. In this slide, we have clarification and examples of personal data, personally identifiable data, and sensitive data. An example of personal data is first name, photograph, email address, something that belongs to a person. While personally identifiable information is like full name, date of birth, national ID number, which is enough for anybody to identify you from. While sensitive personal data is a special category of personal data that some regulations like GDPR expand their scope to include them. Examples of personal sensitive data is biometric, health information, political opinions. It is important when you're building your privacy programs that you focus on all this personal data, whether it is publicly available or privately. And your privacy program has to define why you are collecting any of this private data. And you should be clear on how this personal data is being processed. The program should consider not to retain any of this personal data more than necessary. And also, eventually, you have to capture consent of these data from the data subjects. Then comes data security part, where the program should assure integrity and confidentiality and availability of this personal data. This circles approach puts in the center the most important driver of any data privacy program, which is the privacy regulations and laws that apply to your business operation. Building on top of that, in a layered manner, the rest of the program components, which are data process mapping, what personal data your business is processing, then how to assure privacy and protection to this data through different rightly prioritized initiatives. And lastly, defining privacy metrics to measure efficiency of your program and continually refine it. Here we see important numbers in a 2019 published study where 3.9 million is the average total cost of publicized data breach. 7.9 billion is the number of records exposed in the first 9 months of 2019. 279 days is the time between occurrence and containment of a data breach. And finally, hacking was the top breach type for most of these incidents. Actually, the consequences of data breach is not only the hefty fines, but also the reputational damage, especially with most of the current privacy regulations necessitate notifying the public of any data breach. That has brought the issue of privacy to the forefront of executives' mind. Here is a perspective on the proliferation of privacy laws and regulations, where globally there are 120 countries with laws and regulations in place that addresses privacy. Some regulations are on national and regional level, like the GDPR that applies on the EU, the CCPA, California Consumer Privacy Act in California, US, PIPEDA, Personal Information Protection and the Electronic Document Act in Canada. Some other regulations on industrial level, like HIPAA, Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act in the health insurance sector in the US, the GLBA for protecting consumer data in the financial sector in the US. And finally, FERPA, Family Education Rights and the Privacy Act for protecting student privacy data in the US. And finally, we have now frameworks that can be used as a guide rails for implementing privacy program in any organizations. We have the NIST Privacy Framework version 1001, ISO 27701 that applies operational controls mapped against the GDPR articles for organizations' specific compliance requirements. And most recently in my region, the Middle East and North Africa, we have the Egyptian Data Privacy Law 151 that was issued July 2020. The law in brief is similar to the GDPR with some differences highlighted here. The scope, the law applies to the electronic personal data of Egyptian residents and nationals. The non-compliance of the law has a penalty ceiling of 5 million Egyptian pounds, which is around 300,000 US dollar. Yet it has as well a potential jail time of at least 6 months. Response time for data subject request. A decision should be made within 6 days with no time limit for the response. Cross-border transfer is subject to obtaining a permit from the Data Protection Authority. The right to correct and erasure of personal data is there in the law. The right to access for individual to his personal data within an organization is there, but with a fee. The breach notification should be within 72 hours, like the GDPR. The governance part, the law necessitates appointing an Egyptian national as data protection officer. Moving to the actual steps to build the data privacy program. In the below 3 comprehensive phases, we have a step-by-step approach. In phase 1, you have to document the drivers and objectives of your program, which usually the privacy laws and regulations in the scope of your business operations. In phase 2, you have to conduct a privacy gap analysis. And in the third phase, you mitigate the gaps and do the actual implementation and operationalization of the program. Let's delve into the details of every step now. After defining and documenting the drivers or objectives of your privacy program, like meeting or complying with the privacy regulations in scope, you have to establish privacy governance structure. To define who will be the owner of the privacy program, then you have to build a RACI chart for all participants with ownership assigned to privacy-related tasks. Then define personal data you're processing and build a risk map and include privacy risks in the organization risk register. Then you have to launch organization-wide awareness program on data privacy where involving and educating your organization at all levels encourages a tightly woven privacy-centric operating model. Here are examples of who can be the owner of the privacy program in your organization. Starting by privacy department, in most mature organizations, a dedicated privacy function exists that leads all privacy initiatives. Legal and compliance and audit. In many organizations, without a dedicated privacy team, it is often falling to the legal compliance and or audit to take privacy ownership. Since many of the privacy programs are being driven by the increase of privacy regulations, this group often become huge advocate of implementing privacy within the organization. Human resources, occasionally the HR department will take on the privacy program. This is in case for your organization or for any organization that don't have a dedicated legal counsel, and where most of the personal data held by the organization is that of the employees. Sales and marketing can lead the program in cases where most of the personal data is that of the customers. Information security and IT can be the owner of the privacy program as well, as many still think of security and the privacy as being the same, which is not the case as we discussed earlier. Actually, the privacy program can be led by a steering committee. Since it is a multidisciplinary issue, a committee of multiple stakeholders can be a very good way to lead the privacy program. In phase 2, I will walk you through the following 4 activities. 1, complete a private data processing mapping to document what personal data you collect, where you keep these data in your systems, why you keep them, and for how long. Number 2, this is where you conduct privacy impact analysis, or PIA, to compare the status of data privacy in your organization with the regulatory requirements. Number 3, you quantify the risk of data breach on your organization. And in the final activity of this phase, you conduct data protection impact analysis to make sure of mitigating any risk of private data exposure and provide any data protection control required. Phase 3, titled Privacy Map and Implementation, is where you do most of the actual implementation. The phase starts by first activity, which is completing the privacy and protection gap analysis for each business unit in your organization. Then define and alignment and priority risk. Then define alignment and the privacy risk. 3, define specific cost and effort estimates for the privacy gap closing initiatives. 4, assign ownership per each task. 5, prioritize the risk mitigation plan. And 6 is the actual implementation to the mitigation plan tasks. In this slide, I'm listing the privacy control requirements of most of the privacy regulations and the frameworks as a reminder for all the aspects that you may need to cover in your privacy program. Starting by governance is where you define the ownership structure of your privacy program. Regulatory compliance, the regulations in scope of your industry and where you geographically operate. Data processing and handling, you have to be clear about what personal data you are processing. Data subject request, you have to be ready to accommodate any request by data subject to access or correct his personal data at your control. Privacy by design is a concept that you have to consider in designing any business processes or systems that is collecting personal data. Notices and consent is about giving a notice to a data subject that you are collecting personal data and getting his consent to keep that data. Incident response is a process that should be in place documenting how you react to a data breach. Privacy risk assessments. A risk assessment exercise on privacy risks, and it should be conducted when implementing new systems or when you're going through major changes in your systems or business processes. Information security is the private data protection controls that you should have in place. Third-party management, managing the risk of processing personal data with a third-party processor. Awareness and training is your education program to all employees on data privacy concepts. And finally, program measurements is about having metrics in place to be able to measure the program performance. Some of the documentations that you will need to have in place are privacy notice. This is to notify anyone when you're collecting his personal data. Like when you're recording CCTV, you have to put a sign so people is aware. Cookie policy, this is for your company's website. When it is recording customer visits and their browsing behavior on your website, you have to have a cookie policy in place to clarify that. Data retention policy, a document in which you state how long you keep personal data and clarifying that the data will be retained for as short as needed, then it will be destroyed. Data protection policy, this is where you document how you are protecting the personal data in your control, like having data classification, data encryption, and the proper access control in place. And finally, how to make your existing program functional. And this will be by establishing metrics to measure your program performance and identify areas of improvement. and review at scheduled checkpoints in order to maintain your data privacy program alive and drive continuous improvement. The percentage of data classified versus not classified, average time to respond to a data subject access request, number of data subject requests received monthly, quarterly, or yearly, the percentage of data collection business processes that don't capture consent, number of data subject access requests, unanswered versus responded, percentage of projects that include privacy by design during planning phase, percentage of staff receiving privacy training, frequency of testing performed on security controls, percentage of data in transit covered by security controls, number of data transfer agreements in place for external or third-party vendors, and the number of vendors you validated their security status. Percentage of data at rest controls, by that we came to the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening, and I hope it has been informative. Now to the Q&A part. Thank you.